Ancient Egypt was one of the most elaborate and distinct cultures that we have ever seen in the ancient world. The inhabitants of the Nile River Valley created a land of unbelievable art and structures that seem almost impossible to imagine even with today's modern technology. Because of this, the ancient Egyptians left us with an incredible number of mysterious artifacts to attempt to interpret for clues about that powerful culture that reigned supreme for thousands of years. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at mysterious Egyptian discoveries and what they might teach us about the incredible culture of the ancient Egyptians. Black sarcophagus found in Egypt. In July 2018, construction workers found a sarcophagus buried 16 feet under a residential area of Alexandria in Egypt. The mysterious sarcophagus immediately became the center of attention of the archaeological world. On close examination, the archaeologists estimated that it was probably from the Ptolemaic period, which had started after the death of Alexander the Great. The sarcophagus was 6 feet tall and 9 feet long. It was the largest sarcophagus ever found in Alexandria. While everyone was curious to know who was buried inside the sarcophagus, some researchers hinted that it could contain the body of one of the most influential men in history, Alexander the Great. Some people warned that it would not be wise to open the sarcophagus as it might be cursed just like the King Tutankhamun's tomb was. It has been widely reported that in 1922, when the tomb of King Tutankhamun was opened, those involved with the discovery suffered from strange deaths. The archaeologists and their family members either died in strange accidents or suffered from strange illnesses until they died. However, the curious scientists were determined to unravel the mystery of the giant sarcophagus. Ignoring the warnings of the curse, they opened the sarcophagus just a few days after its discovery and found 3 skeletons inside. The sarcophagus had sewage water inside it, and it resulted in accelerated decomposition of the human remains. According to researchers, the skeletons most probably belonged to the soldiers. One of the skeletons had a fractured skull caused by a sharp instrument. The archaeologists have not been able to get any clue about who these soldiers were or why they were buried together. The discovery of the sarcophagus under a residential area in Alexandria hints that there could probably be many other such remnants of the past lying under the city of Alexandria and other ancient cities in Egypt. The Curse of the Pharaoh. On the 4th of November back in 1922, expert British archaeologists Howard Carter and famed financier 5th Earl of Carnarvon, George Herbert, unearthed the tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun himself, and were filled with ecstasy to find it completely undisturbed and within a relatively pristine condition, uncommon to tombs normally unearthed throughout ancient Egyptian expedition sites during this time. As the archaeologists and their team entered the tomb, however, Howard Carter made note to a strange inscription commonly found on ancient tombs written in hieroglyphics that translated to say, "Cursed be those that disturb the rest of Pharaoh. That they shall break the seal of this tomb shall meet death by a disease which no doctor can diagnose." Paying no heed to the warning, the archaeologists cleaned out the tomb and plundered the artifacts that remained. Within 5 months, the financier George Herbert would pass away from sepsis after a bite from a mosquito would become suddenly infected and cause severe blood poisoning. 5 months following the passing of George Herbert, his brother, Aubrey Herbert, would also pass away due to a sudden infection that brought about severe blood poisoning and the development of sepsis. Although the curse would see an end for the Herbert family, the curse would begin to affect the close friend of George Herbert, Sir Bruce Ingham, as Bruce Ingham had been gifted a number of Egyptian artifacts before George's passing. One of the artifacts was a paperweight that contained a mummified hand with a bracelet that bore the inscription saying, "Cursed be he who moves my body." Shortly after receiving this gift, Bruce Ingham's house would mysteriously burn down. During reconstruction efforts, the house was hit by a flood, preventing further construction from beginning in the area once again. The mystery of the Sphinx. Originally a theory posited by the groundbreaking author Robert Temple, there appears to be overwhelming evidence that the Sphinx we know today was actually an attempt made by a pharaoh of the 4th dynasty to do nothing more than to claim the works of those before him. Evidence for this can be found when analysing the head-to-body ratio of the large statue. The head on the Sphinx is so small that many had often believed, upon first sight, that it could have been grinded down from a much more massive structure. The second piece of evidence is provided by the hieroglyphics located at the temple of Tep-Tufa that outline in great detail that the original god of ancient Giza was Anubis, as well as including the accounts and images of Anubis in his jackal form drawn all throughout the site in the same pose as of the body of the Sphinx, with no mention of a lion of any kind at the ancient city. Interestingly enough, this exact same pose was discovered in one of the only tombs of an Egyptian pharaoh ever discovered that had been completely undisturbed since his burial, the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Within King Tut's tomb is a shrine to Anubis that demonstrates an exact scale of the Sphinx statue, but with the head of a jackal to represent Anubis, showing in overwhelming evidence that the original statue at the ancient city of Giza was supposed to be that of a jackal-headed Anubis and not that of a lion's body with a human head. So, where do we get the idea of a human's head and a lion's body? The truth is, the only reason why the statue is referred to as a sphinx is because of old Greek mythologies, such as those of Oedipus, that talk about a lion with the head of a man called a sphinx, but no such symbol exists in that of ancient Egypt. This means that the hieroglyphic texts that describe the Sphinx with a human head to represent the pharaoh of the 4th dynasty were nothing more than forgeries by the then pharaoh to take credit for a great statue of which he had not created nor designed. Why this is remains a mystery to this day. A mummy wrapped in ancient manuscript. Back in 1848, at the height of demand for ancient Egyptian artifacts on the black market, a Croatian official by the name of Mihailo Baric took a vacation to Alexandria, where he purchased from an Egyptian black market vendor a freshly recovered sarcophagus containing a female mummy to bring back with him as a travelling souvenir. Although this would be incredibly illegal and difficult to accomplish in the modern day, during this time, the purchasing of ancient Egyptian artifacts was more than commonplace for those living in the region, and would not become far more strict until the rise of further popularity in archaeology and Egyptology during the rest of that century. This purchase, however, would remain in private collection until it was donated by its inheritors to the Archaeological Museum of Zagreb back in 1859. Prior to this donation, Mihailo Baric took it upon himself to remove the linen wrappings of the mummy to preserve them in a separate case, as the female mummy was preserved in another. It was due to this removal of the wrapping that the Archaeological Museum of Zagreb would discover that the inside of the linens contained a strange writing originally believed to have been Egyptian hieroglyphs. It was not until about 1870 that German Egyptologist Heinrich Brugsch would make the discovery that the writing on the linens was a different language altogether, leading them to theorize that it could have been an Arabic translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This led the researchers into contacting an expert of the Coptic language, of whom would later claim that the language was that of Etruscan and was untranslatable. Today, the writings on the linens have been copied down and made into a book known as the Linen Book of Zagreb, which is the longest Etruscan text that has ever been discovered. To this day, no one is entirely sure why the mummy was covered in Etruscan text or what the text could possibly mean. The mystery of the nonsense hieroglyphics. For decades, a group of Polish archaeologists have been working to excavate the Saqqara necropolis, or City of the Dead. This necropolis was in the ancient capital of Memphis. Inside is filled with ornate tombs, obvious that this particular necropolis was reserved for royalty. Nearby, in a dig taking place in September of 2018, Egyptologist Kamil Karaskovitz and his team were working in an area between the Pyramid of Djoser, the oldest pyramid in the world, and the Dry Moat, a long rectangular ditch surrounding the pyramid. It was here they discovered something out of the ordinary. When tombs of royalty or other important people are uncovered, they are often filled with grave goods symbolizing their importance. Some are even labelled with hieroglyphics. Modern hieroglyphics have been around since roughly the 32nd century BC, with the first full sentence appearing in the 28th century BC. The written language consists of over 1,000 distinct characters. With this ancient language unlocked, researchers can decipher all kinds of things about the tombs they decorate, including who they belonged to. That was until the dig near the Pyramid of Djoser. Here, the team found roughly 500 simple burials. These burials were simple and in no way as neatly done as those of the royals. One could even call them clumsy. It is thought that this could have been a burial site for the working or middle-class people. The team went on to say that the embalming was very basic, and the bodies were placed directly into pits in the sand or into now much decayed wooden coffins. Although the coffins had much damage and were often found empty from looters, one coffin remained intact enough for the team to study. On the lid, where the name of the deceased would often go, were what is best to be referred to as imitation hieroglyphics. They didn't make one bit of sense. The researchers believed that possibly the painter was illiterate and simply tried to recreate glyphs they had seen before. Furthermore, figures of Anubis, guardian of the underworld, were painted in blue instead of his usual black. They described the coffin as beautifully clumsy. Some believe that although the burials are simple and nowhere near the grandeur of the royal, that everyday people still practice the same funeral practices, or even that the funerals of the royal were mimicked without pure understanding. As we have come to learn, the mummification and burial process held great religious beliefs in the Egyptian culture, great tombs and burials aimed at supplying a glorious afterlife. Maybe this was just one person's go at giving their loved one a chance at having one as well. Garbage dump found in ancient Egyptian tomb dedicated to fertility goddess. A so-called garbage dump has been found in the Grand Temple of the Pharaoh Hatshepsut, all dedicated to the Egyptian goddess of fertility Hathor, it is thought by archaeologists. Found during a project to explore Hatshepsut's temple by a team of Polish archaeologists, the intention had been to reconstruct one of the temple's tombs when they stumbled upon the heaps of trash. Perhaps seeming like garbage today, the piles and piles of offerings were once prized objects, figurines, and gifts befitting a goddess. It is reported that some of the figurines were painted a stunning shade of blue, complete with breastplates and other intricate details. Today, upon finding them, we can study them as artifacts for further insight into ancient Egyptian culture and norms from millennia ago. The site found within this temple, near to Luxor, home of the Valley of the Kings, dates back to being an early Middle Kingdom tomb. However, many of the objects found within the dump date so far as the New Kingdom, which spans the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, which ruled over Egypt from the 16th century BC to 18th century BC. This makes the objects an estimated 3,500 years old, and potentially 500 years older than the temple itself. Such offerings to the goddess Hathor are telling choices. She was once the goddess of the sky, women, love, and of course, fertility. It is also thought that she provided food and drink to the afterlife once they passed along to their next spiritual world. Despite the artifacts clearly being holy offerings, the sheer volume of essentially discarded objects does also lead archaeologists to believe that the site was treated a bit like a dump site as opposed to a dedicated place of worship. It is further believed that local caretakers of the temple may have had to move some of the offerings to a different location as the site got piled too high with deity offerings. The temple itself was a magnificent place of worship. Hatshepsut was the first female pharaoh of the male-dominated ancient Egypt, and the temple's erection in her name was a necessary assertion of her dominance at the time. It was used for all kinds of worship and was decorated with portraits of herself and the gods. We are still in the process of constantly discovering and learning about things so important about our own history, as well as stories unfolding thousands of light years away. Egyptian god Osiris's tomb discovered. In what has so far been described as an eerie discovery, archaeologists in Egypt have uncovered a structure which they believe to be a tomb for the Egyptian god Osiriss. Many centuries ago in ancient Egypt, Osiriss was the infamous god of the underworld, the Egyptian equivalent to ancient Greece's Hades, if you will. The unearthed structure has a blackened appearance and is thought to be a tribute to this god, potentially used for rituals by pharaohs to form a connection to Osiriss and channel his powers. The god of the afterlife was associated in many important ways in ancient Egyptian culture, for he was also the granter of life. Pharaohs and other wealthy members of society thought they could be brought back from their departure from life with eternal life through Osiriss if they paid for the necessary rituals to perform this. Hence, honouring and respecting this god was incredibly culturally significant to pharaohs and Egyptians who could afford it. In fact, even during life, honouring Osiriss was an established part of Egyptian culture. Every year, the legend of Osiriss, his scorned lover, and his brush with passing over being scattered across the Nile, chopped up into 14 pieces before being reborn himself, is remembered as a passion play to keep his legend alive. Back to the tomb. Uncovered at the Al Ghorna necropolis near the Luxor region of Egypt, archaeologists have now estimated that the tomb could date back to as far as the 25th dynasty, or in other words, 760 to 525 BC. Upon further exploration, they were lucky enough to find complete shafts, a chapel, a hallway, as well as more holy sentiments such as a burial chamber and tributes to the god in the form of statues, eternalizing his honor. The incredible intricacies found in this tomb, such as a corridor lined with figures of armed guardians thought to protect it, show how much there is to discover about an ancient civilization which was so beautifully rich with culture. There are many ways of life which we know very little about, but wonders of ancient Egypt never cease to amaze. Egypt Unfinished Obelisk. An obelisk is customarily characterized as a tall and thin landmark, with 4 sides merging to a smaller than expected pyramidal shape at the top. Perhaps one of the most famous ancient megaliths found in Egypt is that of the Unfinished Obelisk. The massive stone has fascinated archaeologists for years, and they have said that once it was finished, it was going to be over 37 meters in height. This giant obelisk also weighs over 1,000 tons, while others have suggested it weighs over 1,250 tons. The reason this giant structure was never used is because the ancient Egyptians had difficulty removing the block of stone. As they attempted to move it, a giant crack appeared down the structure. After this, the stone was no longer able to be used, so it was left there where it was. Due to its size and weight, the structure hasn't changed much since ancient times. In fact, to this day, you can still go and visit the site where it's located. Every year, thousands of people travel to marvel at its size. It's been estimated by Egyptologists that the stone was abandoned during the 18th dynasty. Archaeologists have said that the amount of man-hours that would have been put into this stone would have been likely to have been in the thousands, with the sad part being it didn't even get used. These giant structures were often used by the ancient Egyptians and were often placed at the entrances of things like temples. These giant stone structures would have stood proud outside of Egyptian monuments and would have been proof of their capabilities. It's incredible to think how the ancient Egyptians only had basic tools and yet were able to create such massive structures. One of the problems the workers faced when building these massive structures were looking for stones that had no damage. They would have to ensure the whole rock didn't have any uneven surfaces. If it did, the whole process would have been left. Just like what happened with the Unfinished Obelisk. Although ancient Egypt was an impressive civilization, it did get conquered by other nations, and what's sad is that some of these obelisks have turned up in other countries. There are said to be fakes, but up to 25 of them have been confirmed as the real deal. As of right now, only 8 remain in Egypt. Funary Temple of Ancient Queen Nyet discovered. Earlier this year, on the 14th of January 2021, the Egyptian government unveiled what is believed to be the Funary Temple of the ancient Egyptian Queen Nyet. According to Egyptian archaeological researchers, Queen Nyet was the long-known queen of the 6th dynasty Egyptian king Teti. The find has been regarded by Egyptologists as one of the greatest discoveries surrounding the ancient Egyptian civilization made in the modern day, as it helps to shine a light on the obscure facts of the 6th dynasty. Despite nearly 100 years of archaeologists having been made aware of King Teti, not much has been recovered surrounding the 6th dynastic king, obscuring many prominent facts that have made it incredibly difficult to uncover further information about the king that ruled over 4,300 years in the past. With the discovery of the tomb of Queen Nyet, however, many new key pieces of information have come to light surrounding the 6th dynasty and the ruling family of the time. DNA evidence and recovered artifacts buried alongside the queen has confirmed that Queen Nyet was both the queen to the Egyptian king Teti and also his daughter. Although abhorrent in the modern day, back during the time of ancient Egyptian kingdoms, it was an incredibly common practice for the ancient pharaohs to engage in acts of marrying family members in order to keep their lineage pure, as they believed that their lineage had descended directly from the gods, and so provided the ruling class with the belief that they were blessed with an innate ability to rule over others. Additional recovered artifacts would also confirm that the king would only reign for a period of 12 years, having been made the victim of an assassination involved in a harem plot to overthrow the king and replace him with a far more capable ruler. Where else could Cleopatra be buried? As the archaeological community continues to search for Cleopatra, theories and rumours continue to emerge as to her final resting place. It's important to remember that 20% of ancient Alexandria, the town where Cleo and Mark Antony lived, is actually underwater, so there is always a chance that their tomb sits at the bottom of the sea, in which case it's not likely that it will ever be found. In fact, French researchers began to excavate underwater in the 1990s and did find several indications of ancient life in the town. These included busts, stone sphinxes, building foundations, and more. However, nothing concrete came up directly regarding Cleopatra and Mark Antony's tomb. Therefore, the search went on. The authorities began to map the seabed, and more ancient structures emerged, but they failed to find any conclusive evidence of Cleopatra's tomb. The team want to find a statue or commemorative piece of Cleopatra, which in turn may point to a tomb or burial site. Chances are, however, that this burial site is actually deep under the sea floor. Returning to Kathleen Martinez's theory of the temple burial, she spoke of why she believed that Queen Cleo had been buried in a temple. The Egyptians were superstitious, religious people, and the religious link may have some weight to it. Kathleen Martinez said, "What brought me to the conclusion that Taposiris Magna was a possible place for Cleopatra's hidden tomb was the idea that when she passed away, a ritual act of deep religious significance was carried out in a very strict, spiritualized ceremony. Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian to allow her to bury Mark Antony in Egypt. She wanted to be buried with him because she wanted to reenact the legend of Isis and Osiriss. The meaning of Osiriss is that it grants immortality. After they have both passed away, the gods would allow Cleopatra to live with Antony in another form of existence, so they would have eternal life together. The sea, the land, or underneath both are all plausible locations where Cleopatra could have been buried. However, for the time being, it looks like the mystery continues. Ancient Egyptians used meteorites as jewellery. A more cultural piece of research shows that from 3300 BC onwards, Egyptian jewellery-making practices have used meteorite iron. In 1911, a series of iron beads on strings were found when the Giza cemetery underwent excavation. Named the Giza bead, this is believed to be the earliest use of iron from ancient Egyptian society that we are yet to discover, with these beaded necklaces being dated between 3500 and 3600 BC, despite this being centuries prior to the Egyptian Iron Age. Initial assumptions were quick to label the necklace beads to be formed from meteorite iron, a claim supported by the nickel-rich iron composition, though this notion was not long established before it underwent criticism. In the 1980s, researchers expanded the possibilities that they may have accounted for this, considering that these iron creations were early efforts to smelt iron, not iron derived from a meteorite. A broad regional range of researchers collaborated throughout Britain, from the Natural History Museum located in London to the Open University based in Milton Keynes to the University of Manchester. The research undertaken by the British team included the use of both an electron microscope and a CT scanner to confirm the quantity of nickel in the composition of the jewellery. If the composition aligned with expectations, then this procedure can be seen as having confirmed the iron is indeed that of a meteorite. Professor Philip Withers from the University of Manchester described meteorites as having a unique microstructural and chemical fingerprint, meaning that identifying said fingerprint in Egyptian artifacts is strong evidence for meteorites having been used. This study concluded just that. This fingerprint within the 5,300-year-old Gerza beads is a result of the meteorite having been used, distinctive due to a meteorite's slow travel through space impacting its composition. Not only does this research provide important information into the makeup and tracing of meteorites, but it also allows us to see how modern equipment and technology can accelerate and improve the accuracy of these identification processes. Perhaps most importantly, we can understand the role of these materials in different societies. Dr. Diane Johnson, affiliated with the Open University's Centre for Earth, Planetary, Space and Astronomical Research, states, "Meteorite iron had profound implications for the ancient Egyptians, both in their perception of the iron in the context of its celestial origin and in early metallurgy attempts." This idea was supported by statements made by Dr. Joyce Tilsley from the University of Manchester, who suggested that whilst our modern society views iron as practical but dull, it was a rare and beautiful material to ancient Egyptians. Apparently, due to meteorites having fallen from the sky, iron was believed to have been magical or religious in its nature. There is lots to learn surrounding the practices of ancient societies, and the use of iron in ancient Egypt suggests skills and understanding centuries ahead of its time. Egypt is full of cultural and historical discoveries and mysteries, making it the beautiful country it is today. What more can we learn about its intriguing past? Oxyrinkus Papari. The Oxyrinkus Papari are a series of manuscripts giving insights into some ancient civilizations. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, two papyrologists, Bernard Pine Grenfell and Arthur Surridge Hunt, uncovered this collection of manuscripts in Egypt. As professors of papyrology, the pair research, analyze and study ancient literature, presented and preserved as a manuscript that has been recorded on papyrus. Papyrus was the sole most common writing material used within ancient civilizations, including ancient Egypt, so those who study it are aware of the society, culture and languages of these ancient societies. Grenfell and Hunt found this extraordinary group of manuscripts nearby to Oxyrinkus, an Egyptian city and well-established archaeological site. In fact, many suggest that Oxyrinkus is the single most important archaeological site to have been discovered to date. More specifically, however, the pair discovered these texts in an ancient rubbish dump. Researchers have successfully dated the Oxyrinkus Papari to the Ptolemaic and Roman Egyptian eras, ranging roughly between 32 BC until approximately 640 AD, marking the Muslim conquest of Egypt. Despite the common connotations with the word manuscript, only an estimated 10% of the Oxyrinkus Papari are literary, with the majority being comprised of documents such as codes, registers, census returns, petitions, court records, accounts, and even private letters, as opposed to being extended pieces of written work. This is not uncommon in papyrology, with correspondence and legal archives being as significant an element as the literary works. Most of the Oxyrinkus Papari were written in Greek, with a great deal also being produced in Egyptian, using hieroglyphics, both hieratic and demotic. Some other languages seen include Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and Pahlavi, though in decreasing percentages. This presents a grand opportunity for etymological research as well as archaeological, delving into the history and development of each of these individual languages. Since their initial discovery in 1898, over 5,000 of these documents have been transcribed, a momentous achievement considering this information stemmed from boxes filled with tiny fragments and pieces, mere centimeters large. Despite so much having been achieved, this is considered to have only 1 to 2% of the papyri accounted for, leaving a minimum of 500,000 manuscripts left to be prepared, transcribed, and deciphered before the final step, cataloguing. Today, the Oxyrinkus Papari are stored worldwide in respected institutions, including Oxford University's Ashmolean Museum. These documents have given us a whole host of information, from the written words on topics from maths to drama to religion to the practices and processes of ancient societies. A new female mummy, Thuya. Back in 2018, the archaeological and Egyptological community saw a gold rush of breathtaking ancient Egyptian discoveries surrounding the entire region of El Asasif, which proved to be a tremendous boom to the area's local economy at the height of their tourism decline. A hive of unearthed, buried structures, complex cities long forgotten, ancient traditions, and religious artifacts of incredible value available for anyone to see became the archaeological centerpiece of El Asasif between 2016 to 2018. However, it was not until the end of 2018 that archaeologists made a groundbreaking discovery that confirmed a long-held theory surrounding the ancient Egyptian officer known as Hori. According to archaeological researchers and leading Egyptologists, situated alongside the western bank of the Nile River, opposite to the upper dynastic southern ancient Egyptian city of Luxor, there resides a long-forgotten Theban necropolis that had been buried within the deep sands of the Egyptian desert for several thousand years. Located in El Asasif, the Theban necropolis has been at the center of decades-long investigations surrounding what are believed to have been tombs of officers of the state that date back more than 3,000 years into the past. One of the recently discovered regions of the Theban necropolis, an enclosed area known only as the TT28 tomb, was believed to have been the personal tomb of one of the highest officers of the state more than 3,000 years ago, known only by the name Hori. Although not much is known about the ancient Egyptian officer, he was believed to have been the owner of the estate of Amun during the Ramesside period back in the 16th century BC, and to have been tasked with the duties of an ancient Egyptian official, handling taxes, planning, and political jobs such as advising the pharaoh, overseeing religious ceremonies, and preparing bodies for the afterlife. It was back in November of 2018 that archaeologists uncovered 2 unopened sarcophagi within the TT28 tomb and opened them up to the public for a special event to help revive local tourism. The first sarcophagus, a richly-styled coffin that was believed to have been dated all the way back to the 17th dynasty, was confirmed by Egyptologists to have housed an ancient Egyptian priest of such tremendous stature that it is understood that the man had been the lead embalming doctor for ancient Egyptian pharaohs, personally responsible for handling the bodies of kings and viziers throughout his life. The second sarcophagus, which was provided with its own special opening ceremony, revealed the mummified remains of a female resident believed to have been dated all the way back to the 18th century dynasties, sometime around the time of the pharaohs Tutankhamun and Ramses II. Next to nothing is known about the female mummy, though speculations have arisen since the opening of the casket surrounding her possible role in the estate and the reason for her embalming. Given the fact that the Theban necropolis is closely tied to religious ceremonies and offices of the state, it is theorized that the female mummy, now referred to as Thuya, was a high priestess who oversaw many of the religious traditions of the region and played a significant role in the embalming processes. The TT28 tomb discovery was not limited to the unearthing of 2 sarcophagi, however, and soon researchers uncovered a wide variety of artifacts that are still under study to this very day. Their finds included restored walls covered in high-quality paintings, a papyrus scroll not yet made available to the public, 2 wooden statues, 5 masks decorated with a variety of colours and paints, and over 1,000 clay faience and wood Ushabti funerary figurines. Given the extent of the discovery, it will most likely be years before all of the artifacts can be studied, catalogued, and made available for museums to showcase to the general public. Who is the KV21B Mummy? Ancient Egypt is known for its mummies. These preserved corpses wrapped in swaths of cloth are one of the most popularized images of the Egyptian Empire. Mummies are both creepy and fascinating. However, the mysteries that surround mummified Egyptians are both intriguing and complex. The Valley of the Kings is a sprawling plethora of ancient Egyptian burial chambers and tombs that lie below the sandy plains near Luxor, southern Egypt, on the banks of the River Nile. Researchers have found roughly 65 tombs at the site, with rulers from the 18th to the 22nd dynasty buried there. The 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt spanned from around 1550 BC to 1292 BC. The most famous of the 18th dynasty rulers was Tutankhamun, or King Tut, as he is more commonly referred to. The 18th dynasty was also a groundbreaking period in the Egyptian era, being the only dynasty that had two women who ruled Egypt as sole pharaoh. One of these women was the Queen Nefertiti. Nefertiti was the wife of Akhenaten, the 10th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He is known for being a heretic and abandoning the traditional religion of the Egyptians in favor of a religion called Atonism, which, as well as being named after Akhenaten, centered on the worship of the god Aten. Nefertiti's fame was propelled by her husband's controversies, but also because she is thought to be the aunt of Tutankhamun. It is rumored that Nefertiti also ruled herself for a short period after Akhenaten passed away before Tutankhamun's ascension to the throne. One of Nefertiti's daughters, called Ankhesenamun, would later marry King Tut. He and Ankhesenamun had two daughters at least, and this brings us to the true mystery surrounding the KV21B Mummy. Tomb KV21 in the Valley of the Kings was discovered in 1817 and re-explored some years later in 1989. In the tomb, the researchers found two mummies, both in fairly poor condition but relatively intact. CT scanning and DNA analysis was carried out in 2010, and the first mummy, termed KV21A, was discovered to contain the same DNA as Tutankhamun. In other words, KV21A is likely to be his wife, Ankhesenamun. The tomb of Nefertiti is still yet to be officially found, but it's thought that KV21B is her. The DNA collected from KV21B is even less definitive, but given that other tombs in the Valley of the Kings have mothers and daughters buried together, it's thought that Ankhesenamun may be buried with her mother, Nefertiti. If scientists can verify the KV21B corpse, then it would be one of the most ancient Egyptian discoveries to date. The treasure chest revealing clues to Thutmose II's lost tomb. An unbelievable discovery has been made at one of the largest archaeological sites in Egypt, Deir el-Bahari. Archaeologists uncovered a buried stone chest holding some interesting items which could date back to over 3,500 years ago. The individuals credited with its discovery were from the University of Warsaw's Institute of Archaeology from Poland, with Professor Andrzej Nowinski leading the investigation efforts. It is believed that this discovery can lead us to the lost tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose II. Deir el-Bahari is a site near Luxor and Karnak, two other successful excavation sites, and is a remarkable complex of monuments and tombs meant for ancient Egyptian nobility and royalty. The tomb of Hatshepsut lays there, and the Polish archaeologists have been working tirelessly on this site for the past 60 years. The chest was discovered by sheer luck, found in a pile of heavy debris which resembled nothing more than another segment of an ancient building's wall. Professor Nowinski, when interviewed by the media, explained that it was only after they gave the debris a closer look that they realized what it was, a chest, intact and full of archaeological treasures. The chest measures 40 centimeters in width and length. all the items found inside the chest were wrapped in bundles of linen canvas to protect them. 3 vital items were found. There was a skeleton of a goose. Historians have since hypothesized that it was sacrificed for religious purposes. The second item was an egg of the goose, potentially representing the life contrasting the departure from life symbolized by the goose. And finally, the egg of an ibis bird. In ancient Egypt, the ibis bird held immense spiritual value, much like the cat. Next to the stone chest, there was something else wrapped in a bundle of linen, a wooden box with the name Pharaoh Thutmose II engraved on it. The box was in the shape of an ancient Egyptian mortuary chapel. The items and wooden box all pointed towards it belonging to a member of the royal family for certain. Professor Novinsky shared his thoughts, claiming that the royal deposit indicates that a temple or a tomb was being raised in the pharaoh's name. The evidence steers this theory due to the fact that the site is in the middle of a royal cemetery. The likelihood of it having been a tomb is immensely high. The found boxes suggest that there was indeed a time when the pharaoh was buried at this site, though whether he is still hidden somewhere deep around the area or if at some point in antiquity his body had been moved elsewhere is unknown, as the tomb of Thutmose II has been deemed lost for thousands of years. The pharaoh himself was only in control of Egypt for a mere 3 years, from 1476 to 1479 BCE, and was recorded to have passed away at the age of just 16. When he was alive, he was married to his sister, Hatshepsut. Though incest in the bloodline of Egyptian royals was considered normal at the time, and often was only done to keep the power within the family for political reasons. However, the young pharaoh seemed to have been nothing short of a political puppet for his sister wife, who went on to rule over Egypt as one of its first female pharaohs, and her reign was regarded as powerful, prosperous, and great. As soon as the stone chest and wooden box were found, the team hurried to try and find the tomb of the lost king, believing it to be hidden in plain sight. Perhaps the eternal resting place of the pharaoh had caved in through the millennia and could be found with a little harder work and digging. The archaeologists involved believe they are incredibly close to discovering the tomb of Thutmose II, and if they prove to be successful in their quest, then this will mark one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of this century, if not the greatest discovery within the last millennium. This tomb would be completely untouched by the looters of the past and could give us a never-before-seen insight into what an authentic, untampered-with royal tomb looked like and the truth into Egyptian burial rites. The last time an untouched tomb was found was that of the famous Tutankhamun, which had been abundant with treasures upon its discovery. But what do you make of these recent discoveries? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us grow this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.